Perfect. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, good morning, everyone. We are now on episode 9 of the Around the Bed podcast. I keep messing up which episode I'm on my intros, so now I should be correct. Episode 9. We have the pleasure of having Jared Flores from Analytic Vision here and Tejas Manohar, would you be the CEO and founder of Hightouch?
Uh, Co-founder and co-CEO at Hightouch, yeah.
Co-founder, co-CEO. Come on, give yourself credit. Just you don't need to add a co in there. But
Close on
today
everything.
we definitely wanted to spend some time talking about Tableau. We actually I didn't meet Jared, but I met Tejas at the MDS conference sponsored by Fivetran. I met all of Jared's team from Analytic Vision, and really Jared's one of kind of the premier, what do you call it, subject matter experts when it comes to Tableau, even according to Tableau. So it's a pleasure to have him on. If you guys want to break down your own little backgrounds and whatnot.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been around the data world for a little bit. I started in supply chain. I actually started in a warehouse, packing pallets and stuff, and worked my way into the data world. And Tableau is kind of my break into doing data visualization and understanding that. Eventually, I started really exploring Tableau prep, and that got me into the data engineering side of things. And the more I learned about it, I decided to start teaching about it, and that's sort of become my little niche and why Tableau has recognized me as a Tableau visionary, because of there wasn't a lot of content around their prep tool at the time. So yeah, I do all things data, full stack, go from legacy data systems to all the modern stuff in the cloud. So that's me.
Yeah, Tejas,
Nice.
if you want to take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Tejas, one of the founders of Hightouch. I don't go as way back in the data ecosystem as Jared, to be honest, and I'm not as deep in Tableau either. But I I first got introduced to the data ecosystem maybe about 7 to 8 years ago. I joined a company here in San Francisco called Segment. It was what you call a customer data platform. That was the term, or CDP. Actually, wasn't the term at the time, but eventually became that. Idea was like, bunch of companies are trying to get data into SaaS tools like Salesforce or Adobe or Amplitude or Mixpanel, or all these new SaaS tools that are coming out. Why don't we make an easy way for companies to track data in a unified way? So here's how you track a user signing up or going to your website or adding something to your cart. And then Segment would forward it to all of these different places, so that you can have kind of one copy of the data forward to a bunch of different places. And while I was there, I built this integration with Segment to the data warehouses. And that was my introduction to data warehouses, when Amazon Redshift was like the new cool kid on the block, and later BigQuery and Snowflake. And I just saw that huge transition from the data warehouse being this like advanced analytics tool to being like the center of attention and source of truth across the business. And that's why I decided to found Hightouch. And really simply put, we make it easy to take data from your warehouses and bring
Mhm.
them to all the different operational systems around your company, like Salesforce or Marketo or Adobe Marketing Cloud or Facebook ads, so that you can run actual business processes off those data instead of just analyzing it. So yeah, we call it reverse ETL for the data community.
I like that. No, that's good. And I definitely, I mean, Jared's of course an expert in Tableau, but just with your background, I thought it would be good to have you on here as well and do a nice little roundtable. Over the past couple of years, probably some of the biggest news around Tableau is that it's been acquired by Salesforce. And it was the premier kind of data visualization tool for a long time. Since I'm not an engineer myself and I'm just like this business ops recruiting sales guy, sort of an outsider looking in, I thought it'd be better to bring on smart people like yourselves to give your 2 cents on this, these kind of things.
You got to give yourself some more credit.
I'm good at understanding things at a general level.
Nice.
Yeah, if you want to take it away, Jared.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm curious, because I do have a lot of thoughts on sort of where Tableau has been and where it seems like it's going, but I'm curious, Tejas, from your perspective with the reverse ETL, right? and with Salesforce being the parent company now, um, what you've seen them doing with Tableau, does it make sense, or is it sort of advantageous for what you're trying to do, right? Take the data warehouse, integrate it back into their tools. Salesforce has done a little bit of that with like the Tableau and Slack integration. You can kind of take your data and visualize it, and visualize that data back out into your tool, your Slack. And um, I've seen more of the sort of integration of Salesforce things into Tableau rather than Tableau things into Salesforce. And so I'm
Hmm.
just wondering, like from your perspective, what are you seeing there? Like, what are some things that they're doing with Tableau and Slack too that are kind of fit into the reverse ETL?
Yeah, 100%. So it's interesting. We're like kind of the dedicated player, I guess, like in the, data activation, reverse ETL, data automation space. Or our goal is to integrate with as many systems as possible. So we integrate with like 200 plus tools, and we try to get our customers using Hightouch to send the right data to all the different business systems they have, whether they're SaaS tools or ad networks or CRMs or ERPs or all this sort of stuff. But I think as the data warehouse has kind of become the center of attention, as more people in a company have been using BI and recognizing that that's where the most complete source of data exists in a company, you start to see these like light integrations, as you
Hmm.
mentioned, that pop up inside of Tableau with Slack or Salesforce. I think Tableau CRM is like the product
Mm-hmm.
they have there. There's probably other ones as well, or with Looker, etc. And yeah, what we see is that I think there will be like business users who use some of those integrations too. But the data team and data management and data engineering teams will really want a dedicated tool that they can use to integrate across the whole entire business. So if anything, I would say like it's good to see Tableau putting some steps in that direction. Just kind of validates the need for more companies to use data from their warehouse in all these different business systems. But I doubt they will go for like a really dedicated play to help companies activate their data across the board. And that's a pretty large problem of the size of Tableau itself, probably.
Yeah, so I think something that when you look at the data community, and it's you've got different segments of it. You've got your uh, Power BI advocates, and then you got your Tableau advocates, and it's like pretty much every tool has their own community. But
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think really for Tableau, before the acquisition, I mean, basically their marketing was the community, right? The community's just been so involved. There's all kinds of initiatives to help people get upskilled in the product and learn more about it, and provide reasons why their businesses should be adopting it. So that was really the powerhouse behind how they grew into what they were before the acquisition. Um, and so I think it's interesting that now you're kind of seeing, like, it takes a while for these acquisitions to really play out. I think it was 2018, 2019 when they actually acquired Tableau. And uh, you didn't really see much change until probably early last year, when a lot of the updates started being really Salesforce focused. Let's integrate CRM. Let's integrate Einstein at the time. Let's integrate all of these, make it easier for Salesforce customers to use Tableau, which makes sense, right? If you're going to spend that much money on a tool, it makes sense to make it easier for your customers to use it. But I think the thing that has been interesting for the community, and that if you look, you see a lot of people voicing opinions about it. Um, and there's really strong feelings about the direction it's headed, because it seems like it's the direction has kind of been, instead of um, let's try to figure out how we can make more of our Salesforce users Tableau users. It's really, let's take the Tableau customer base and make them Salesforce users.
Hmm.
And so, oh, go ahead.
It's funny because I used to be a Salesforce developer and I used to have like kind of my own business centered around that. They were so good at making it open. They were trying to make it like an open source kind of thing, the free trainings, all that. And it's kind of sad that they had that culture for so long, and they should have applied that to Tableau. It sounds like I just kind of had that thought floating around
Yeah,
my head.
and I mean, you look at the Trailblazer community, and they still have. I mean, they're so strong. There's so many people in that community, and it's they've still got all kinds of learning platforms and programs, and it's they've kind of gamified it with their badges and things. Which and some of that, like I think more recently we've seen some of that transition over to Tableau, where I've noticed a couple of Trailblazer badges you can get related to Tableau. But
Hmm.
again, it's like Tableau with Salesforce,
Yeah,
when you still have tons of people using Tableau as their primary BI tool who maybe they don't even have a CRM and their business doesn't have a need for it, or they're using HubSpot or things like that. So um,
and also too, maybe this is a good question that normal people like myself have. In the data pipeline, like I know Tableau is a visualization tool, more sitting up above the data warehouse. Is that correct? Again,
yep.
apologies. And then, you know, Tejas, the Hightouch. Where does Hightouch sit in the data pipeline?
Yeah, so kind of like how Tableau sits on top of the data warehouse. So you already have data in there. You build some models in the data warehouse. We also sit on top of the data warehouse,
Okay.
and we can plug into queries you've built in something like Tableau, or queries or tables that you've built in the data warehouse, and just imagine the data warehouse is like a huge Excel sheet of information, right? And take that data and put it places. So we're also kind of on the right side of that data warehouse diagram once data is already in there.
I see. No, I mean that's how I guess what I'm kind of driving at, and maybe some people more from the business ops side are kind of curious, like how Tableau is integrated with Salesforce, and they sort of have this reducing open source kind of community. Like, how do people engage with Hightouch? Is it like a very difficult tool for people to wrap their hands on? Is it something like you need a technical background? Is it more like something a business analyst would work on? Like, give us a breakdown there.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, anyone who can use something like Tableau, or Looker, or Power BI, can actually use Hightouch as well. Our most
Mm,
popular customer is like sort of a data analyst, business analyst, someone who's like building reports in something like Tableau. But we've even built integrations directly with Tableau and different BI tools, so you can just take a report that you built of your high value leads, or your leads that should be reached out to, or users who haven't made a purchase recently, and just once you're analyzing it, you can just ship it directly to Hightouch and start syncing it to systems like CRM systems or advertising systems to go outreach to those customers. So it's a pretty like low tech, low code kind of tool at the baseline. But we've also built a lot of technical features because we have huge Fortune 500 companies where their data engineering teams are seeing Hightouch like as the way to automate data across the whole company. So
mhm.
they want reliability features and monitoring features and all sorts of stuff. So barrier to entry is low, but ability to scale is high. Is the way I would put it. Actually, I was curious, Jared, like what do you see as kind of the future of Tableau? Do you think they're gonna innovate properly, or more lag in the market, or what are you thinking there?
I think I think there was some concern in the past year that they might start lagging because of the sort of heavy Salesforce focus. I think a lot of the concern was Tableau is sort of losing its identity, and it's really just all going to be Salesforce. And how do you differentiate, and how do you make sure that the development and the roadmap is still what we need out of a BI tool? But I also think that because the community has been the backbone of it for so long, um, they do also have a pretty strong voice, and they've been using it
Mm,
to very loudly say, like, we do not like this. Some of these things don't make sense, and we want to keep growing the tool, but we're not going to if it doesn't make sense. And so I do think there's been a lot of pressure put on them lately. Where, I mean, I don't know if you saw, um, what was it? I think it was like early mid January, late January, where Salesforce had done pretty big layoffs, and they had sort of disproportionately affected Tableau, where a lot of them were sort of Tableau focused. A lot of people who have been there for a long time got laid off. And then you've kind of seen in the months before that, a lot of the executives that were there, Mark Nelson, the CEO, stepped down. A lot of those high level executives kind of started slowly stepping down right before the layoffs.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, yeah, there was this concern that, like, is it just kind of getting absorbed and it's no longer going to be like Tableau? It's just kind of going to become something completely different. And
Hmm.
so when that happened, there were tons of people in the community who started calling out Mark Benioff, and we're like, hey, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't align with what we've seen, what we've been told, what as businesses that the more we kind of hook ourselves into this tool, um, this doesn't make sense that you would then turn around and heavily reduce that staff. Like, where is this tool going? Why are we reducing it so heavily? Um, is the focus of Salesforce going to something else?
Hmm.
So there was a big response to that too. I mean, even from some of the loudest people in the community, Mark personally reached out to a lot of them, and uh, we there was a lot of meetings and there was public discourse, right, around what does this mean. Are y'all actually going to respond to our concerns here? And I think they did a pretty good job
Hmm.
of doing that, right? They calmed the waters and said, your fears and concerns are valid, but at the same time, like, Tableau is still strong. It's still a heavy part of what we want to be in the future.
Hmm.
And so now I think it's just a matter of what does that really mean for Salesforce? Like, they said it, and there has been, especially with Tableau conference coming up in two weeks, there is, I think there's a lot of eyes focused on what are y'all going to show us during this conference that's going to match the words, because that
Hmm.
was a concern going into conference last year too. There was a lot of, you know dis dissatisf people didn't weren't happy with how it was going. And so during Tableau conference last year, that was a big theme of Salesforce was there, and people made it known, like, y'all need to listen to us. Y'all need to listen to the community,
Hmm.
um, because this doesn't make sense. And so during the time at conference, that was sort of the response from Salesforce, like, hey, we hear y'all. We want to get in the room with y'all. We really want to understand what the true concern is from a business perspective, and how we can make sure that we're headed down the right path. And so there was a feeling coming out of conference last year that, hey, Salesforce, they heard us, and they're going to start heading in the right direction. But then the rest of 2022 happened, and it didn't align with what they said. And
Hmm.
so I think the attitude going into conference this year from the businesses that have the larger investments into the tool, and from the members of the community who are um, bringing a lot of traction to the tool, of like, hey, we're not gonna let you song and dance us this time. Like, what you tell us this year, you have to mean it, or we're losing interest.
And just kind of thinking about that as like a company that's really well developed. Tableau's been around a while. They have this community that's angry and possibly going to be shrinking over time. Tejas, as the co-founder of a company and kind of having your own community based around your own software product, like, how do you promote that or deal with that, or is that just something that just kind of happens organically outside of your control?
Yeah, for sure. So we definitely don't have a community that's quite as established as something like Tableau at this
Of course.
time. Both both from a volume perspective, as well as really, um, we just like haven't invested in that motion enough, I think. But one thing we do really believe in is just talking to customers and putting customers at the center of everything, and not just our direct customers, but the people in the organization they're benefiting, the people who are sending them requests to do work and bring data into different systems. So we really try to understand, like, what are the businesses we're serving, what are they like, what is the whole problem of activating data look like versus just like the technical problem, if that makes sense. And that comes from speaking with customers, visiting our customers, going to conferences, and all sorts of things. So community is a bit more of a fluid thing here at Hightouch, but it all comes down to an emphasis on listening and emphasis on sending people out to really do discovery and understand, not just how the data person's using Hightouch, but how are the rest of the organization benefiting from Hightouch, and just like really living in the customer's world. And that's a big emphasis at here, both from the founder level like myself, as well as from even the product and engineering team, as well as the marketing team. Really focus on that, because that's what drives a lot of the good insights and ideas that we bring into the product and bring into our messaging, and that really resonate. I think data is really a sort of a team sport, if that makes sense.
No, I like that. That's definitely a good response and an interesting point of view. As a growing company, we'll kind of see how things develop, and maybe in 2 years we'll be like, wow, remember Jared when we knew Tejas? You never know. You never know where these things are going to go. But I know you got a hard wall at 11:30. Is there anything else you wanted to throw in?
Um, Maybe I'll seed a question for you guys, which is, one
Ooh.
thing we're seeing is BI, it's still the data visualization layer. No doubt about that. The data visualization layer needs a dedicated tool, but a lot of people just use BI tools like Tableau for data access. And what we're seeing is data access is, as the need demands for data access, goes up in the organization. People want to access data in all sorts of tools, not just Tableau or Power BI, but in Salesforce, in SAP, in Adobe, in their ad tools. And a lot of people are doing that today by exporting data from BI tools like Tableau and moving those into those systems. But I think, like, in some ways, the next gen of SaaS tools will be powered with the rich data that people have in their warehouse, and will be maybe the main interface to data for a lot of roles, versus something like Tableau or Tableau embedded inside of these tools, or iframe or whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting. I think visualization reporting is here to stay, but I think a lot of the data access might be moved to the places people already live, whether it's like, a notification hitting you up on Slack, or a response from Chat GPT. I'll throw that in there. Or, you're just seeing something in your SaaS tool inline when you pull it up, like you're responding to a support ticket in Zendesk, and you can see information
Mhm.
about the customer. Curious to get your thoughts on that, Jared. And I'll have to, I guess, watch the episode to hear it, but curious to hear
Yeah,
your thoughts.
we'll definitely break it down, but no, that's a good one. Dang, makes me and my brain think about the tools I use.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts on it. I like you said, Tejas, I know you've got your hard stop, so it was definitely nice to meet you, and interesting conversation. But you know, I'll expand on my answer to this, and like you said, you can catch it later.
All right, I'll see you later.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, no, that's a good point though. The That's kind of the way we see a lot of people using it, right? To just kind of access the data, and uh, it's just an easier place to look at what you're trying to look at without having to know how to do queries, and having to know, how to really clean it up, and make sure the values are what they're supposed to be.
Hmm.
um I think there's a balance there that I'm not sure in BI that we've really found yet.
Hmm.
Because, right, like the whole purpose of a tool like Tableau is, let's get people out of Excel and make it easier, and make it more valuable. Tables aren't, you have to spend a lot of time digging into tables, whereas a visualization, you can kind of look at the aggregates and get more value out of that, get more insights faster. But there's still so many people at the executive level of businesses that are just that they're used to working in the tables, and it's almost like that it's more familiar, so it's easier to trust it. um, and so part of the battle is like getting folks out of that mindset,
Hmm.
but then at the same time making sure that you're still enabling them the way that's going to be most effective for them, right? Because I've worked with executives that have just made it very clear, I understand data visualization, I understand the value of it, I'm telling you to give me a table because that's what works for me. Don't try to give me a visualization and talk me into the value of it. I already know that. It just doesn't work for me. So don't give me the bar charts, give me the table.
I see.
Um, and so, I mean, there are people that are just like that. That's what works for them. And they don't really have a bunch of incentive to try and learn to absorb it differently. Um, and so, yeah, a tool like Tableau does become basically Excel in the cloud, and you've got a bunch of dashboards that are tables, and then people are just exporting those back into Excel to do something else to them. Um,
It's
that's a hard puzzle to figure out exactly like how to make sure that what you're putting on your dashboard is solving whatever the problem is, so that people don't have to do that anymore, and that they trust it, and that everything there makes sense. And that's where you can kind of start getting into the whole conversation of data governance and data catalogs and making sure business definitions and calculations and all that are aligned. But um but yeah, I mean, even Tableau, I think, is already kind of aware of that, because
mhm.
I think I want to say it was at the TDX, the Trailblazer sort of mini conferences that they're doing around that recently. They kind of showcased a way to make it easier to embed Tableau into applications and sort of give you an easier way to generate the code that you would need to embed it. And so, yeah, I think they're already kind of aware of like, hey, people are not really using it the way it's been built today. So let's make it easier to try and embed these things, or try to, yeah, just give people a place to access the data that they don't got to go searching for.
One of the funniest problems that we constantly see, like, I mean, I do recruiting, right? And my team basically just helps try and connect um, the right engineers to the right people. And one funny thing we'll run into is that some of the people are so smart, they have such good ideas, they really are like, they'll go to a client and be like, oh, we could really do this much more in this amount of time and build in these extra functionalities and do these extra things. But like you said, there's like a lot of people are like, well, why? Even if you can, even if it's the same amount of money, people leave a lot on the table just because that's how they want it and that's how they understand it. It's engineering to me, the way that I've seen it from a business operations standpoint, becomes somewhat emotional, if that makes sense. Like you said, you could do all this extra functionality, you could do all these extra things, but hey, I like my bar chart. Don't mess with my bar chart.
Yeah.
Don't show me a more complex thing. I like my bar chart. And that's kind of like how Domo Analytics, the one that we use, or it's supposed to work. Mine seems to keep having issues, and we keep retooling it, and it keeps having issues. But that's another problem. Um, and it's really funny to kind of watch exactly what you're saying. I see it all the time, and it's interesting too. Even from a business operations sales standpoint, I'm not an engineer, but I could be like, hey, this would really improve a lot. I'm willing to learn something new, have somebody train me on how to use this so I can be more efficient. But there's some people that, no, it's like trying to move a donkey or something. They're dead set on whatever they're dead set on.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like the mindset around it is so interesting, because I used to work somewhere, and I we had some problems with some of our data models, and so they weren't uh like, we had a bunch of dashboards that we were looking at, that once we really dug into the way the data was being modeled, we realized like, oh crap, this has been wrong for a very long time, and we're just now noticing it. And so I built a sort of model that took it and modeled it the right way it was supposed to be modeled, and then put it into an Excel file. Just kind of as it was like an interim step until we figured out the way it needed to be retooled to when before we put it into the dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was just something that like every morning I would run it, and it would spit out the Excel file of like our most recent data, and I would send it out to a couple of folks, and they would like take the data, copy it, and paste it into their own little formula Excel sheet. um but then eventually, like, before I left, we got it to a point where like the dashboards were reflecting exactly what that Excel sheet was showing. But I talked to a buddy of mine maybe 2 months ago. He was like, "Hey man, you know that model you built that you manually run every morning?" He's like, "I'm still doing that every morning because that's the only thing people trust."
Oh my
And I was like,
gosh.
"But the dashboard is showing the same thing. Like, what? I don't understand."
I think there was a really I saw this really funny meme that reminded me of when I was doing the Salesforce development, or I do like, come in do like IT support for small businesses, and it was like uh when you tell a business owner that Excel is not a database, and it was like shun the non-believer, and it was and that's how I felt, because I was like trying to explain to people like, hey, like it's actually really dangerous that you put all this important information in an Excel sheet. You should put it in like a cloud database, and like there's a, is it, it's easy for me to make you a Salesforce one. And then they're like, oh, I don't know if you really know what you're talking about. And I was like, okay, whatever. You're putting the risk of your business, your data, and a dot XLS. So whatever. I'm not, can only tell you what I can tell you.
Yeah, and even the amount of protection you can do with those is not like you have to do so much just to try and protect an Excel sheet. Um,
And
we
it
a
was
couple
bad
years
too. Like it
ago,
was like bank numbers, like like really important financial statements. And I was like, whoa, I'm like, I'm not a consultant, but that's, that seems bad. And I'm not a data or a security engineer, but I can tell you this is like raising some massive red flags.
I know it's always really um, it's something that you got to be really considerate of, and I think, and I don't know if it's talked about enough when it comes to data engineering. Like, yes, there's a sense of security and everything, but like, I mean, you have to be really careful when you're touching any of that data on how if you're like, especially using tools like Fivetran and ingesting, just kind of replicating databases into Snowflake. It's like, are you fully aware of what you're replicating and how
Yeah.
it's being encrypted? And if you're using the right version of Snowflake to make sure that it's encrypted the right way and
Hmm.
up to compliance if you were to ever get audited and all that, like there's so many considerations there that uh, you have to have such a deep understanding once you get into that world. That I mean, I liken it to like network security, and I hate network security so much because it's like, okay, we've got the firewalls and everything's IP protected, and we've got a virtual network around the firewall, and but is it still what you're supposed to be doing? Is there an extra layer of security you need to add in?
Hmm. And there's so many things that can go wrong. And I think the scary part is like, I mean, I'm not allowed to say all these situations, but I've just seen with clients, with some very high level clients, things that are super questionable that make you go, hmm. It's kind of like the whole thing with Southwest Airlines. So you just like your data, like you said, where are you getting your data from? Is it trustworthy? There's all these, realistically, it's like an ongoing process that never stops. And if you treat, like one of my family friends, he was, or I guess is a CISO, and he's like, if you treat it as like a goal, then you've kind of failed, because it's more like a path or a process, kind of just like your data visualization and other things. Like you can't really just get your Excel sheet and say, cool, or, I made this program so I can pump out Excel sheets. Okay, we're good now. We're done. We don't need to deal with this for another 6 months or a year. Like, no, that's not the way you need to think about it. It needs to be like a constant process, constant development, constant change to drive, well, and I mean, for your security or for, your objectives. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of companies really do miss out on the data portion, or they look at data engineering and all these tools as like something that Facebook does, and, or, like Meta, or that's what big companies do. But it's like, no, like really non-technical companies actually stand to benefit the most in terms of optimization and other things, in some ways more than some of these tech companies. And it's really, and I think it loops back to the guy you said that likes his bar charts or likes his pie graph and doesn't want another way to see it. You know, you can't really change that until a younger generation of either engineers or business professionals comes in and takes that over, you know?
Yeah, because like I said, like what's the incentive for that person to learn something new if they're still able to kind of hit their goals and their margins? What it doesn't matter to them to learn it.
It's a I mean, these are probably the same things that the same argument that's being repeated since they first brought on the personal computers and things like this. Like, you know, somebody's like, oh, we gotta get this stuff into whatever software came before Excel. Somebody told me the name of it. I can't remember. It was like ABC or one AB123 or something. I can't remember, but you know, I'm sure there was somebody sitting in the C-level suite. It's like, no, I love my paper sheets. Can't mess with my paper sheets.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's a funny anecdote. Now I'm going to get super sidetracked. My grandpa was whatever the equivalent position of a CTO was. He was that at IBM back in like the 50s and mid 60s. And they used to have like the cards, you know, that's how you coded, is you just stuck cards in there. And it was crazy to me because what they had is like the cutting edge 50 years ago is like, you know, it's just changed so much. And the scary part is I was listening to this IBM podcast, and there's still companies like this is a business unit of IBM from the 70s. They have reels to store your data on, and there's no way to hack it or do anything because it's like a physical ream of data. I don't, or it's tape,
Hmm.
like tapes, like that, you know, how they movies and stuff
Right.
like that. They still have that as a business unit. And I was like, what companies still have data stored on tapes? Because that raises a whole nother set of questions. And it says a lot about IBM that they still have a tapes division. And then they were like, oh, well, you just don't understand because it's like real security and stuff like this. And I'm like, okay, but still, it's like ask it, just that being there begs a whole bunch of other questions, you know? Like once you start going down that path or that lack of innovation, you know, just like starts unlocking a whole bunch of other like, well, if you're doing this, what else are we doing? You know?
Yeah, man, you'd be surprised. There's so many companies that are still like there hasn't been a super big need for them to modernize how they're doing that because maybe they haven't tapped into how valuable their data is or I mean
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons for it, but like not even that long ago I worked with a company where their main production server that was even tied into all of their applications was a desktop in an
Hell yeah.
office that was plugged into 3 backup batteries.
Hell yeah. Love it.
Like and we run into like several times there would be like you wake up in the morning and everything's not working and be like, hey Steve, can you run up to the office and reset the computer? Like it was bad.
Gosh. That is a unique situation, but I think like the process mentality, especially if you've probably worked in a really large company like myself. I used to work at Verizon, and I remember like one of our ticketing pages was like, I was like, somebody designed this in 1994. The UX and the UI has not been updated since 1994. So, but then it leads to that question. So, what else hasn't been updated since 1994?
I mean, even when I there was quite a few years ago, I worked at Guitar Center as like a
Ooh,
warehouse technician,
nice.
and the entire system of like how you we would make sure that when we received the trucks that was entered into the system, it was a green screen, like just a green screen computer with just black with green text, and that was the
Oh,
whole system.
wow.
Um,
Okay.
and I mean, we're talking like it was mid 2010s, so like not that long ago.
No,
And yeah, they're still operating on the whole 1990s green screen OS.
that,
So it's like, yeah, there is a point where for some companies, it's like yeah, we could modernize this, but why?
And I think they reach the collapse point is usually what prompts those update decisions. Um, I know we're getting a little bit sidetracked, but now you made me think about there was this article in the Wall Street Journal about a week and a half ago where they still have to hire COBOL programmers for large sections of the IRS's systems. And there's certain software packages running on federal systems that is over 60 years old. I'll repeat that. There are software packages running on the federal government's servers, and especially they were talking about the IRS specifically, that are over 60 years old, which means what, 23? So software that was created in 1963, which means they have hardware to support software made in 1963, and that was like 10 applications, but 400 plus applications. So they had like 700 in total, something different applications, and 400 of those applications are running on software that is over 30 years old. So written in the early 90s or late 80s to mid 90s, basically. And to me, that just blew my mind. I'm like, that's how you're running the government of like one of the most powerful countries in the world. So it's like, and you have to think those are not one person decisions. That's like, it's just like in a large company. It's a amalgamation of screw it, let's kick this can down the road. And then you're gonna reach a point where there is a critical failure where you are no longer able to do whatever you did. And from my perspective, once you hit that point, it's way harder to recover than if you had just decided, screw it, I'm going to spend that extra, 5% of my annual budget to get some new hardware, do those mandatory software updates. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are just my 2 cents.
And I think to kind of bring it all back around, I think this does still tie into um, maybe why tools like Tableau are able to um, sort of pivot and maybe in a direction that, like I said, for a lot of customers isn't necessarily what they want, but it doesn't necessarily result in like drastic losses of business
Mm-hmm.
as you would expect, because now things are moving so rapidly to where, yeah, you have some of these businesses that haven't migrated systems in forever and they're just kind of waiting until it falls apart and the duct tape breaks before they do it because it's just worked for so long. But then you have some organizations where they're like, they saw something new and shiny and then they were like, oh yeah, I'm gonna we should migrate to this tool. And it was a startup company and it fell apart. And so they had to migrate to another one and that one fell
Mm.
apart. Now they're kind of like migrating every 2 or 3 years. And so that's also unsustainable. And so when you have something like Tableau that's been around for a little over a decade, and yeah, maybe the last couple of updates haven't done anything for me and it's getting a little bit more expensive, but like I also like when I see something out there like Sigma or Looker or Click, it's like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to make this huge overhaul to migrate to a tool like that
Mm.
when I might kind of look back in 3 years and be like, I really liked what Tableau was. I'm going to move back to that.
And it's like nothing's perfect too, right? So in terms of
Yeah.
cost, how it works, how it integrates, it does become a sticky product, just like we see with Salesforce, and just like I've seen many times. Like it's hard. I've looked at many CRM tools, and that's like a good example. Tableau probably as well. It's like you have this kind of community developed around it, you have a good amount of support, good brand, it's not going anywhere. And then it's like, well, but if I jump to this new thing, you have to run that. It's like rolling the dice a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why Tableau and Power BI have been able to succeed the way they have, because it's like Tableau is, it's got that look and feel more modern, and it's really makes it really easy for business users to step into the data. Power BI, it's if you've been working in Excel and Access forever, it feels so familiar and you can step right into it, no problem. And it's kind of it's a little bit more technically involved, but like again, if you've been working with Microsoft Suite for a long time, it doesn't feel too strange. And that sort of technical that learning curve you're already kind of used to. Um, but yeah, I think right now, I mean, I feel like when I'm on LinkedIn and stuff, and I get sales emails from so many different new tools all the time that kind of do the same thing, and they look fancy and shiny and new, but I don't know. There's this sense for me of like, how what does it take to migrate to a tool like that, and how stable is it? Like, how big is it really going to be? Is it really going to be able to take much from what Power BI and Tableau are already doing? I think like Sigma is a big one. I've seen them, or at least last year, I feel like at every
Yeah.
conference they were all over the place, and I saw articles everywhere. It was like a real big intentional push from their part to really heavily market it and try to grow it. But then I kind of look at it and I'm like, I get it. I see it. I see how it would be like, especially if a company is like barely stepping in, great, cool. I can step into this tool. It's completely hosted on the cloud, utilizing it. Like if I'm also migrating to something like Snowflake, it's utilizing that compute, and I don't have to overcomplicate it. Um, yeah, great. But if I've got, 1,000 users on a Tableau cloud environment, I don't know what the appeal is quite yet.
Yeah. And that's actually interesting you mentioned that. Like one of the reasons I wanted to bring on Tejas was because, Fivetran, they brought the best of breed and they only let the best of breed kind of show themselves. But there was others there, kind of floating around in the background. But it's I found it interesting because I know that Microsoft and different companies, they kind of select or say like, hey, they're not part of our company, but hey, we kind of suggest you go to this tool. They integrate well with us. It was interesting to see among the whole like data stack. Of course, Microsoft offers tools and IBM does the same thing, but among all they weren't like fresh startups, you know what I mean? It was like your whole team was there as well. It was like what would you call them? Mid large startups, a lot of them.
Right.
Like they're on the verge of like either they're really more towards the verge of almost being public, but they're still private kind of deal. And so like they seem pretty established. So like Fivetran, I mean they had Hightouch, Sigma, Elation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I can say it correctly. So it was sort of interesting to see a partner market where they've all kind of looked at each other and been like, we trust you guys, sort of, to
Mm-hmm.
talk with our customers. And that I found that to be a unique, mm, what would you call it? Like community acceptance or like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's because it's like, I mean, at the end of the day, for partnerships like that, they kind of all help each other, right? It's like,
yeah,
hey, if you're already using Fivetran, you may also want to catalog your data and understand the definitions of everything and standardize what your business users are looking at. Or,
hmm,
um, oh, you're thinking about getting Fivetran. Well, what are you ingesting? Do you need a visualization tool to look at
yep,
it? That it helps the conversation. Like it's where Fivetran can say, we've had a lot of clients who have also had success using these tools, so it helps us get in the door,
yep.
and it helps them get in the door.
Well, exactly. And I think that was an interesting, I found that to be unique because it wasn't just like a big conference centered around one idea. Like RSA just has
Mm-hmm.
like everyone shows up, but it was like Fivetran's like, hey, this is about us, but also like these are like our trusted go-to people because just for visualization, just for warehousing, there's like hundreds of vendors.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many, but to basically have the best of breed all show up in one spot, I found kind of cool, and it was actually pretty. I like this. Yeah, thank you for kind of giving your 2 cents on all this stuff. I think it is a good, how do I call it? A good talk in the beginning was more for people like you and Tejas, and this end part was more for like dum dums like me.
No, I mean, I think it's all good topics, and I mean, there's so much there, and I think right now it's like again, like it's a good conversation right now because it's so interesting, all of these tools popping up, and to see what's going to kind of be left standing at the end of it as like the premier stack, which
Mm-hmm.
only my opinion, but it kind of seems like DBT, Fivetran, Snowflake has become like, if you've got the budget and you want the Lamborghini, that's the kind of stack you go with.
Yeah.
And then, your visualization tool on the end of that, which I think Tableau and Snowflake have established a pretty good partnership. And so that kind of becomes like your premier modern data stack. You go DBT, Fivetran, Snowflake, Tableau.
Yep.
And I mean, and even DBT, when we talk about new tools popping up, are they going to stand the test of time? I think that's why DBT has taken off the way it has, because when you look at it and you look at all the marketing, you look at the website, you look at the tool, the cloud version, and all of that, it's modern UI and UX and very appealing and nice, and the heavily documented. They've already got a huge community, but when you step in and look at the details, it's just SQL. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a smarter way to do SQL, but uh, it when I hear arguments on the other side of, I don't know if DBT is going to be scalable, and you're doing all your data engineering in SQL, and you could be doing it in like PySpark or something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, companies are doing it in SQL anyways, so
Yeah.
why not just do it a little bit smarter?
And I can tell you, like, just behind the scenes, like the skill sets they're looking for, SQL is by far just way more in demand, in terms of like data scientists and things like that, than kind of any other language. Or even, what was it? I had one recently that was like, were they like an ETL engineer? But it was, of all the languages, even across multiple clients, it was like SQL, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't even come close. I mean, I think if I had 10 orders, 8 to 9 of those are going to want SQL, and like one is going to want PySpark. It's just not, even among the highest level companies, it's not a not common choice.
Yeah, because then you run into just issues in general with whenever you do need to increase your talent pool. What do you do there?
That's
I mean,
actually one of the, apologies, and then I'll go for it.
I was going to say I ran into that issue in the past too, where sort of all of the data models were all in PySpark, and I was just like, I mean, I could look at them and make sense of them, and I was just like, but why? I mean, like, why did we overcomplicate it? Because now we have a team of 4 people who are the only 4 people that know how to adjust it. When if we would have done it in SQL, like, it's not like we're getting this huge performance benefit out of doing it in that versus doing it in SQL. So it overcomplicates it.
It's a good analogy. Is like, I like cars a lot. I used to sell cars, and like, let's say you want a supercar, you can get a Chevy Corvette for 70 grand, brand new. And I'm just making up numbers at this point. You can go 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, or you could go buy the Audi R8 for 110 grand, but you're gonna hit 0 to 60 in 5 seconds flat. You know what I mean? So it's like that extra little performance bonus, but then you can't find the right talent to do the PySpark. It's hard to find those people. Those people cost more money because it's a more rare skill set. It's just, yeah, it's all the auxiliary problems that come around it that is the practicality of business and life comes in, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've hit a lot of good stuff here. I didn't know if you had any kind of wrapping up thoughts or any other things you felt like we should have got to.
No, I mean, like you said, just general roundtable on all these things. I think nothing particular I was wanting to touch on. So I think we had
Hey,
a lot of good topics here.
yeah. I mean, I want to say thank you for taking the time out, and I'll get this all up and everybody can watch it. And, I got to put that plug out there. Was it like, subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts?
Yeah, man.
Cool. Hey, thank you, Jared. You have a great day, okay?
Yeah, man. You too.
Bye bye.